For years, a single question followed Lindsey Graham wherever he went. It showed up in interviews, in newspaper columns, in late-night conversations between political insiders who thought they knew everything about the man. He had served in the military. He had argued cases in courtrooms. He had stood on the floor of the United States Senate and shaped the direction of the most powerful country on earth. And yet, through all of it, one part of his life remained untouched, unexplained, and quietly mysterious. Why had Lindsey Graham never married? It sounds like a simple question. The kind of thing you might ask about a neighbor or a distant cousin. But when the person in question is one of the most recognizable political figures in America, a question that's simple never stays simple for long. People noticed. Reporters asked. Colleagues speculated. And with every year that passed without an answer, the curiosity grew louder. Some people filled the silence with rumors. Others filled it with judgment. A few filled it with theories so dramatic they would have made a Hollywood screenwriter blush. But none of them were right. Because the truth had nothing to do with scandal, nothing to do with secrets, and nothing to do with the kind of story that sells tabloids. The truth was something far more human than that. It was something most people would recognize if they had lived through loss, if they had ever loved someone enough to give up something important, or if they had ever made a promise and refused to break it no matter what life threw at them. That is the story that was quietly sitting beneath every rumor, every headline, and every whispered theory about Lindsey Graham's personal life. It had been there from the very beginning. Most people just never looked in the right direction. After his passing, the woman who knew him better than any journalist, any colleague, or any political ally finally decided to speak. His younger sister, the one he had raised, the one he had sacrificed for, the one he had built his entire personal life around without ever asking for a single word of credit, she told the world what had been true all along. And when people heard what she had to say, many of them felt something unexpected. Not shock. Not scandal. Something quieter and far more powerful than either of those things. They felt the unmistakable weight of a life lived entirely for someone else. This is that story. And it begins not in Washington, not in a Senate chamber, and not in front of a camera. It begins in a small town in South Carolina, where a boy was learning what it truly means to be responsible for the people you love. Central South Carolina was not the kind of place that made national headlines. It was a quiet town where people knew their neighbors, where businesses were built on handshakes and hard work, and where family meant everything. That was the world Lindsey Graham grew up in. His parents, Millie and Florence James Graham, owned a business called the Sanitary Cafe. It was not just a restaurant. It was also a bar, a pool hall, and a liquor store all rolled into one. For years, the Graham family did not just work there. They lived there too, in rooms behind the business, before eventually moving into a small house next door. Life was not easy, but it was stable. Lindsey learned early what it meant to contribute. While other children spent their afternoons playing or watching television, he was often helping his parents. He served customers. He cleaned tables. He did the small jobs that kept the business running. There was no allowance for extra effort. There was just the understanding that everyone in the family had a role to play. Those years shaped him in ways that would last a lifetime. He learned discipline. He learned the value of showing up even when you did not feel like it. And he learned that the people you love sometimes need you to set aside what you want in order to give them what they need. His parents worked long hours to provide for their children, and Lindsey saw firsthand what sacrifice looked like. When it came time for college, Lindsey became the first person in his family to attend. That alone was a milestone. He enrolled at the University of South Carolina, excited about the future and ready to build something for himself. He had no grand political ambitions yet. He was just a young man trying to figure out what kind of life he wanted to live. For a while, everything seemed normal. He went to classes. He made friends. He thought about careers the way most college students do, imagining possibilities without fully understanding what any of them would cost. And then, in 1976, everything stopped. His mother had been sick for a while. She had been fighting Hodgkin lymphoma, a cancer that attacks the lymphatic system. The family had known she was struggling, But hope is a stubborn thing. People hold on to it even when the odds are not in their favor. That year, she lost her battle. Lindsey was heartbroken. Losing a parent is one of the hardest things a person can experience, no matter how old they are. But at 20 years old, still trying to finish school, still figuring out who he was supposed to become, the loss felt enormous. He grieved. His family grieved. And then, just 15 months later, his father died suddenly from a heart attack. In a little over a year, both of Lindsey Graham's parents were gone. The world he had known, the stability he had grown up with, and the people who had guided him through every stage of his life, all of it disappeared in what felt like an instant. He was no longer just a college student with a future ahead of him. He was now a young man facing a choice that would define the rest of his life. Because when his parents died, they left behind more than just memories. They left behind his younger sister, Darlene. She was only 11 years old. 11 years old is too young to understand why the world suddenly stops making sense. It is too young to process the kind of grief that comes from losing both parents before you have even learned how to navigate life on your own. Darlene Graham had just lost everything that made her feel safe, and the people around her were trying to figure out what came next. The easiest solution, the one that required the least amount of sacrifice from anyone, would have been to send her to live with distant relatives. That was the practical answer. That was the path that would have allowed Lindsey to focus on finishing college, building a career, and living the kind of young adult life he had every right to live. He was 20 years old. Nobody would have blamed him for choosing that path. Nobody would have pointed a finger or called him selfish. He was barely an adult himself, and the weight being placed on his shoulders was not his to carry by any reasonable measure. But Lindsey Graham did not choose the easy path. He looked at his 11-year-old sister, a girl who had already lost more than most people lose in a lifetime, and he made a decision that would quietly reshape every single day that followed. He told her he would take care of her. And he meant it in the most complete and permanent way possible. He did not simply agree to check on her from time to time or make sure she had somewhere to go on holidays. He became her guardian. He restructured his entire life around the responsibility of raising a grieving child while still being a grieving young man himself. Friends who were close to Lindsey during those years later recalled how quickly everything about him seemed to shift. The carefree energy that most college students carry disappeared almost overnight. In its place was something steadier and more serious. He still went to class. He still worked toward his degree. But there was a new weight in the way he moved through the world, a sense of purpose that most people his age had not yet discovered. He was not just building a future for himself anymore. Every decision he made had to account for Darlene. Every opportunity he considered had to be measured against the question of what it would mean for her. After completing his undergraduate degree, Lindsey enrolled in law school at the University of South Carolina. He was preparing for a career in the military as a lawyer in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, commonly known as the JAG Corps. It was a path that would give him stability, structure, and the means to provide for both of them. But there was one more step he took that most people never fully appreciated. To ensure that Darlene would have access to military family benefits, including healthcare and financial support, Lindsey legally adopted his own sister. He did not do it for attention. He did not do it to be recognized as noble or selfless. He did it because it was the most practical and loving thing he could do for a child who needed security more than anything else in the world. That single legal act said everything about the kind of man Lindsey Graham was beneath the political headlines and the Senate votes and the television appearances. At an age when most young men were thinking about dating and freedom and possibility, he was signing paperwork to become the legal parent of his little sister. The promise he had made to her was not just words. It was a structure he built his entire life around, quietly and without fanfare, for decades to come. Some truths are too important to stay buried forever. After Lindsey Graham passed away on July 11, 2026, at the age of 71, the tributes came quickly and from every direction. Republicans spoke about his decades of military service and his unwavering commitment to national security. Democrats who had clashed with him over policy remembered his willingness to reach across the aisle when it mattered. The McCain family, who had become as close to him as his own blood over the years, spoke about losing someone who had been a constant presence in their lives long after Senator McCain himself was gone. Washington is not always a place where people agree on much. But in the days following Lindsey Graham's death, there was a rare and genuine consensus. He had given his life to something larger than himself. He had served with discipline and with passion and with a loyalty that never wavered even when the political winds shifted around him. And yet, even in the middle of all those tributes, the old question returned one final time. He had died as one of the most prominent lifelong bachelors in the history of American politics. And now, with him gone, the people who had always known the real answer finally felt the time had come to share it. His sister Darlene Graham Nordun spoke simply and without drama. She did not call a press conference. She did not sell her story to a magazine. She simply told the truth that had been living quietly inside their family for more than 50 years. She said that after their parents died, Lindsey made her a promise. He told her he would take care of her. And according to Darlene, he never once came close to breaking it. He had not remained unmarried because of a secret or a scandal or a hidden life that the public was never allowed to see. He had remained unmarried because he had already made the most important commitment of his life before most people his age had even thought seriously about commitment at all. At 20 years old, he had chosen his sister over everything else. He had chosen stability for her over freedom for himself. He had chosen to be her parent when the world had taken both of theirs away. And that choice had quietly shaped every relationship he considered, every opportunity he weighed, and every stage of his adult life for the next 5 decades. When people heard Darlene's words, something shifted. The rumors that had followed her brother for years suddenly seemed very small against the reality of what he had actually done. The speculation collapsed under the weight of something far more powerful than gossip. It collapsed under the weight of genuine sacrifice. The real story of Lindsey Graham was never about what he was hiding. It was about what he was protecting. It was about a promise made in grief by a young man who had every reason to walk away and chose instead to stay. It was about a little girl who never had to wonder whether someone loved her enough to show up, because her brother answered that question every single day for the rest of his life. Some people spend their whole lives searching for a love that is complete. Lindsey Graham found it early, gave it freely, and never once asked for anything in return. And now that the truth has finally found its way into the light, it is impossible to look at his life the same way again.